in a psychiatric hospital. And as a newcomer, as a sort of freshly baked psychiatrist, I had to get up early and give the electroshocks and the insulin comas, up to 25 electroshocks and 15 insulin comas.
From the late 1920s to the 1950s, insulin comas were used to treat schizophrenia. After an insulin injection, patients might perspire heavily. Many salivated profusely. And eventually, they would contort in spasms. Once a profound state of unconsciousness was reached, a nasogastric tube was inserted. Bile was drawn to verify the correct placement of the tube, and then a glucose solution was administered. Archival films depict patients waking to feel energetic and hungry. The procedure had a mortality rate of 1 in 100. Stan induced 15 insulin comas a day. Electroshock therapy began in the late 1930s from the belief that artificially induced convulsions could cure mental illness. Electrodes were placed on a patient's temples while an electric current passed through them. The resulting convulsions were strong enough to cause broken bones if the patients weren't restrained. Curare, derived from South American plants, was later used to paralyze motor nerves and lessen the convulsions. Stan administered 25 electroshock convulsions daily. Even psychoanalysis proved disappointing for Stan.
I was in psychoanalysis for 7 years. And when in the 4th year I started bringing in my dreams images that were related to the oral period, this was considered to be relatively successful psychoanalysis.
Fortunately for Stan, Sandoz Laboratories needed help exploring applications for a new drug synthesized by Albert Hofmann, lysergic acid diethylamide, or LSD. The Swiss scientist was revisiting his synthesis of the ergot fungus when he accidentally intoxicated himself. A drop of the clear solution touched his finger and was absorbed into his system when he wiped his eye. Intrigued by the unusual sensations, Hofmann decided to try a tiny dose a few days later. What followed was an endless bike ride home and a call for a doctor when Hofmann thought he might be dying. Once the crisis passed, Hofmann realized that his discovery was an incredibly powerful psychotropic substance.
And 1954, we got a sample of ampules of LSD. They got an idea that it might be something interesting for psychiatrists, psychologists, and would we want to work with it? So my preceptor did not have the time to spend 6 to 8 hours with people on LSD. And so he used several of us as gophers. We were sitting there and taking care of the experimental subjects and keeping records. But in that early stage, students were excluded. So I had 2 years when I was listening to these incredible stories and not being able to have the experience. So just about the first thing I did, and I graduated, was to have this experience myself. My teacher was specifically interested in entraining the brainwaves, which means exposing people to powerful stroboscopic light of various frequencies and finding out if you can influence the brainwaves in the suboccipital area. So all of those of us who wanted to have a session, we had to agree that we also would be going through this experiment. When my own experience was culminating, a research assistant took me to a very little room, and then she brought this gigantic strobe, and in the next moment there was light like I had never seen in my life. My consciousness was catapulted out of my body. I lost the research assistant, I lost the clinic, I lost Prague, I lost the planet. And then I have the feeling that I was completely extinguished. I ceased to exist in the form in which I knew myself. And instead I had the feeling that I somehow became all of existence. I became nothing, but by becoming nothing, I became everything. I was in the astronomical universe, or I was the universe. And there were things happening for which at the time I didn't even have name. But later I read about the Big Bang and the black holes and white holes and wormholes, just an amazing cosmic spectacle. And then she turned it off, my consciousness started shrinking again, I became myself. But there was a problem because I ended up finding the planet, finding the clinic, finding my body, but my consciousness was kind of floating around the body and I couldn't find ways of aligning those two. At that point it was absolutely clear to me that what they taught me in the university, that consciousness is somehow created by the activity of the neurons in the brain, suddenly it's totally absurd. I mean, it's clear to me that consciousness was a cosmic phenomenon. Could matter, bouncing of atoms or subatomic particles, create all that we see, including the beauty of nature, the beauty of the universe, the intelligence that you see in animals, that you see in people? Is it really something that can create science and philosophy? Then you see it's absurd. There is a beauty and there is an intelligence which cannot come out of matter. So I came down from the session that if I'm now stuck with psychiatry, this is by far the most interesting thing I could do, studying these non-ordinary states.